Hi everyone, my name is Molly McCarthy-Comfort and I work for the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Division of Sportfish. And tonight's presentation is Ice Fishing 101. This could also be called an introduction to ice fishing. So I hope that some of the people tuning in right now have maybe never even fished before in their lives and are wondering if ice fishing might be a good starting point. Hopefully those of you that are not new to fishing can also take something away from this presentation as well. So before we dive into the nitty-gritty of ice fishing, I want to talk to you about why you should go ice fishing. The pictures in the top, that's my sister and I back in the 90s, as you can probably tell from our clothing. We loved the snow. That was our very favorite thing, was playing in the snow. And when I walk through my neighborhood and we just got a little bit of snow here in Anchorage and I see the kids, they are outside and they're playing in the snow and they're having the time of their lives. So what does this have to do with fishing? Well, if you're looking to start doing some fishing with your family, if you have a couple of young kids that you haven't gotten into it with them because it's tough. It's tough to go out on the water, and especially in the summer with all of the gear, to keep them busy the whole time. There are a lot of reasons why we can say, you know, it's too hard to go fishing with little kids. Well, the beauty of the winter is if you go out ice fishing, those little kids can play in the snow the whole time and still fish and have a good memory of fishing versus maybe something more challenging in the summer where you're dealing with different gear or you're dealing with a lot more people around. So ice fishing is a really good gateway to getting your kids or yourself into fishing if you've never done it. So my parents started taking my sister and I out on the ice, and I grew up in Massachusetts. So at the bottom photo, those are all Atlantic salmon that we caught on a local lake. But we would go out on the ice and my mom or my dad would bring our sled to play in and our ice skates, our cross-country skis. Once we got older, we would bring all of our fun winter gear. We'd bring a grill, and we would just plan on it being like a family picnic day, but at a lake on the ice while we were fishing. So I have a lot of really fond childhood memories of ice fishing, and I continue doing it now because it's a really fun way to get out and enjoy the winter. Now I bring my dogs and they seem to like it as well. So before we get started, I'll let you know what I'm going to talk about tonight. First, I'll go over safety, followed by equipment, some ethics, and then we'll really dive into how you can find the water that you want to fish on so that you know where to go based on what you're looking for, what type of experience you're hoping to get. And then we'll talk a lot about fish and what they eat and different ways to target them based on some of the things we know about those fish. So when we talk about ice fishing safety, the biggest factor with ice fishing is making sure that the ice is safe to recreate on. So any lake ice can be unsafe based on what's going on at that lake. That is not really that helpful of a statement for you to go out ice fishing, but it's true. So how can you tell what is safe? Well, when I'm going out ice fishing, I have a few things that I like to do, sorry about that, before I go out. And the first thing is I like to go to the municipality of Anchorage. I live here in Anchorage, Alaska, but hopefully there are people from all over the state watching this. I go to my local Parks and Recreation website and I check. So this is Thursday, November 12th. There might be a new one up tonight. So as of now, there is no ice thickness listed at any of these locations, and they all say, please use caution. So you don't know a number of inches of ice right now, but you might see other people out on the ice already skating and fishing. So a good first step is checking your local Parks and Recreation website. If there is no information, it doesn't hurt to drive out to the lake and see if there are folks fishing on it. It doesn't hurt to bring a spud bar or something to check out ice thickness with. So when I say test the ice, if you drive out to a lake and no one's fished on it and still early in the season, it's helpful to have something that you can jam into the ice to see if it'll break from the impact of you hitting it. If it does, don't go. You can also, if you have an ice fishing auger, which we'll talk about here momentarily, you can step pretty close offshore and drill a few test holes. That way, hopefully the water is still nice and shallow. If it were to be too thin and you were to go through, you would at least not fall underneath the ice. But those are just a few ways of knowing. I would say just wait until it's been cold for a few weeks, a good cold stretch. That's usually what I do, and then I'll start thinking about going out on ice. How you can be safe, go with a friend. If it's early in the season and you're not sure, go with someone else so that one of you can help the other if something does come up. Make sure you're dressed appropriately. Obviously, if you're recreating on the ice, it's going to be cold. Proceed with caution. So if it's early in the season and you're not sure the ice is thick, don't just like grab all your gear and hop onto the ice and start running because you're excited to go fishing. That could be a very bad idea. And then like I showed you just now, check your local municipality websites for ice thickness. I will say a lot of folks call the Alaska Department of Fish and Game for ice thickness reports. Although staff do hear about these reports, the Department of Fish and Game does not go out and check ice thickness. So your quickest, best way of finding this out is going to be through your local Parks and Recreation Department. So what equipment do you need to go ice fishing? Some essentials: you need your fishing license and you need to know the fishing regulations for the body of water that you are going to be fishing on. If you have questions or concerns about those regulations, or if you're not sure if you're doing the right thing for the lake you're hoping to go to, just call the Sport Fish Information Center for your region. Fishing Game staff will be happy to help you out and talk through those with you. The biggest thing for ice fishing is you need a way to get your bait or your tackle down to the fish. So you need to be drilling a hole in the ice. So you need an auger. There are two types of augers. There's a hand auger, which are a cheap, good starting option for folks going out ice fishing. You hold on to the top, you hold on to just a little bit below, and you're actively cranking. The bottom of the auger has blades on it, just like this power auger, and that's going to put your hole in the ice. Obviously, manual labor, so it's going to be a little tougher, especially when we come into late winter when the ice could be multiple feet thick. But for early season, this is a great option. And I know a lot of people who use hand augers all season around. If you have good blades and a good hand auger, it can be just as enjoyable to use as a power auger. Power auger is obviously, they're propane powered, gas powered. You're going to be pushing on a button and it is going to just go eat through the ice, form your nice ice hole. It's quicker than the hand powered auger, obviously, but it is more expensive. So if you're just looking to get started and you're not sure if your family is going to commit to this hobby, I would say start with a hand auger, or start with just going to the lake with your family and seeing if there are open holes. If you see people fishing in the morning, say you live right on one of these lakes and you see folks fishing in the morning and then they pack up to go to their ice holes, and then you don't even have to buy an auger. So the next thing you need is a rod and reel or a tip up. We'll talk about that next. Tackle, obviously, or at least hooks and bait. An ice scoop is really helpful. This is just it looks like a big spoon with a bunch of holes through it. After you drill your hole in the ice, there's going to be slush in there that is going to prohibit you from looking down in the hole. So you want to get that out of there. And an ice scoop is really helpful. This is a great job for the kids. If you are walking around drilling holes, you can give the kids a scoop and they can scoop all the slush out. Just make sure there's a little string that they put around their wrist, because I got in trouble a lot as a kid. I lost a lot of ice scoops on my dad down the hole. So just something to think about. And then obviously you need warm clothing as an essential. And I have this as an extra, but I honestly think a sled is an essential, because you can throw all of your gear in a sled and just pull it out on ice. It makes your life way easier. So if you start ice fishing and you decide it's really something that you like and you want to start doing it more, a tent is nice to have. That way when it's very cold out or if it's windy, you have a wind barrier. And if you get a little heater for that tent, it could be 5 degrees outside and it can be 45 degrees in your tent. And that's an awfully nice feeling. See, just some camp chairs that you would use in the summer for around the campfire. Rubber mats, really helpful. You can use this to kneel on if you're going to be actively right at the hole fishing, like a lot of kids like to do. Or it's really helpful if you're sitting in a camp chair, you can put your feet up on the rubber mat. Your feet will get cold. I mean, even if you have boots on, they're on the ice. So that barrier is really helpful. And then just a few different, the spud bar, I like to bring that with me when the ice is thin or when it's just starting to form. So I have something to stick into it to make sure that it's thick enough. And then if you really start getting into a hardcore ice fisher, you can look at things like depth sounders and video cameras, which I won't go into detail about today. So here on the left, we have, these are called tip-ups. So ice fishing is really cool and different from the way that you would sport fish in the summer. When you're sport fishing in the summer, you've got a rod and reel, you're out at a local lake, you're actively casting and reeling the whole time, or you're casting and you're sitting down with a bobber out there fishing. But you know, you still need to be paying pretty good attention for when the fish bites. Tip-ups are a passive way of ice fishing. So what you do on the left, we've got our 2 different tip-ups, or multiple different ways or types of tip-ups. The one on the bottom, I have a bunch of those from when I lived in Massachusetts, and they were like $5 a piece or something like that, very cheap. So they've got this cross area that sits over the ice, and down below the ice there is a spool of line. And so when I'm setting a tip up, I let out line down a little ways with bait on it, and then the flag that you can see here, you hook it to a spot where if the spool spins, it causes that flag to go up. So this is a really great thing to have. Say you have someone who's not quite sure about fishing, they're just coming out to hang out and they might want to try but might not. This is a great thing to have because they don't have to 100% commit all of their energy and time on the lake to fishing. They can set a tip up and go ice skate and look at the tip up every little bit and make sure that their flag's not up. So this is a really fun way to go ice fishing with folks that, you know, might not want to be sitting there over the hole the whole time actively fishing. You still need to closely attend your tip ups. So don't go, don't set a tip up and go for a jog around the lake. You still need to be close by, but you can definitely still, ski around them or ice skate or play with the kids or cook some burgers on your portable grill, whatever you want to do. So on the right, this rod and reel is a jigging rod, and that's meant for sitting above the ice hole, and you can just stand there and try to entice the fish actively. So you are 100% involved in fishing. You're sitting there, you're working on it. There are ways to turn your jigging stick into a tip up if you would like, and that's these 2 contraptions. And the cool thing with these is when a fish bites, these actually set the hook on the fish too. Your tip ups aren't setting the hook on the fish. The fish is grabbing your bait and running with it. And so when you get to the tip up, you'll see your spool spinning because the fish is moving, versus this, when your jigging stick, it causes it to flip up and that hooks the fish. So just a few different options for ice fishing to think about when you're going out ice fishing. I will say, if you're completely new to this and you don't want to spend money on it, I know a lot of folks from back east who their first time ice fishing, they got a stick or a wooden dowel. They put wrapped fishing line around it. They put a hook with a piece of bait, and they just lowered the line down the hole and fished with, you know, a wooden dowel or a stick. I mean, this can be as simplistic as you want it to be. You literally just need to have something to hold on to, have a line, and then have a hook to hook the fish with. So if you want to do a family craft night and try ice fishing for the first time, just get some line onto something that you can hold on to and a hook and see what it does. I mean, I used to catch a lot of crabs doing that back east. So it's a fun way of fishing and it's super cheap. As you get more into ice fishing, and that method works for smaller fish. If you're thinking about fishing for pike or burbot or lake trout, definitely invest the money in the gear. But if you're looking at just trying at a local stocked lake, then why not? So we'll talk a little bit about ethics. We all want to show that we're respectable people, so that we can keep going ice fishing on a lot of our local lakes and in local communities. So the first way to be an ethical angler is obviously to obey the regulations. The regulations are there to protect the resource so that we can all continue going out and utilizing it. So in doing so, respect the resource. So if you catch a fish that you're not going to keep, don't throw it onto the ice for 20 minutes and then decide, I don't want this. I'm just going to leave it on the ice or throw it back in the hole. So have respect for that fish. The next thing, private property is a big one to think about in the winter. The beautiful thing about ice fishing is it gives us access to the entire lake. In the summer, unless you have a canoe or a boat, a lot of times our access is restricted to the public shoreline. And a lot of our local lakes don't have a lot of public shoreline. So the winter opens up so many possibilities for us. But remember, that shoreline is still private. So you can recreate on the lake, but don't go walking up onto private property just because you now have access to it because of the lake ice. So make sure you're respecting private property and other folks while you're out on the lake. If you're not going to eat the fish, make sure that you're releasing those fish. So try to keep the fish in the ice hole in the water to the best of your ability. But if you can't do that, very quickly pull it out of the water. Make sure to remove your gloves and wet your hands before touching it. Remove that hook quickly and get it back in the water as soon as possible. This is critical in times when it's very cold out. If it's, -10 out and you're at ice fishing and you pull that fish out of the water and you're fumbling around for a while, you can cause permanent damage to that fish because it is getting exposed to those incredibly cold temperatures out in the air versus down in the water. So make sure if you're releasing the fish to do it quickly, to try to keep it in the water as best as possible. Okay, so how do you know where to go ice fishing? I'm going to show you around a little bit a resource on the Alaska Department of Fish and Game website. And I just posed a few things. So before you go out ice fishing, maybe decide what your goals are. Maybe your goal is you want to have it be a pretty normal day in your life and you just want to fish for 2 hours and stay close to home. Maybe you want to go somewhere that, okay, well, half of my household wants to fish, but the other half wants to ice skate. Okay, well, maybe you want to go somewhere that has both. Maybe you want to go somewhere that has a bathroom. Maybe you want to catch burbot. Maybe you don't care about anything but burbot. That is your goal and you want to go to a lake and catch a burbot. Or maybe you want to fish for wild fish versus stocked fish. So there are a lot of different things you can think about when you're going ice fishing. And I'm going to show you a way to dig a little bit deeper into those things. And we'll start right from the Department of Fish and Game webpage. So if I click on fishing here, and you can click on sport either here or here, whichever. I'm going to click on Alaska Lakes Database. And this is going to look like something really busy, but I promise you it is still a useful tool for you. So here we go, a lot of map pins. I'm going to zoom in to Anchorage. You just double click here. So here I am in Anchorage. All of these map pins show different lakes around Anchorage. So say I live on Muldoon Road, I can go, okay, well, Reflection Lake is here. Okay, there's no fish stocked in it, and there haven't been any fish surveyed there. So probably not a place that I want to fish. So all of these little green tabs are stocked lakes. The yellow, I believe, were previously stocked one time, but haven't been stocked. So this one was stocked in 1993 last. So probably not where you want to go. And then the red are not stocked at all. So Lake Hideaway, Lake in the Hills. So if I'm on Muldoon Road, I'm gonna go, okay, Cheney Lake. This seems like a good spot to go. And when I click on Cheney Lake, I can find a bathymetric map. So that's the lake depth that I can look at. And I can look through all of the stocking data for Cheney Lake. And if I do that, I'm going to see, wow, a lot of fish have been stocked into Cheney Lake in 2020. That might be a spot where I can catch a lot of fish because there have been a lot of fish put into Cheney Lake. So that's one way of using this tool. If you don't know the name of the lake, if you're just like, I want to go fishing near downtown Wasilla, you can look through here and, okay, well, maybe somewhere in here. I've used this tool. My friends decided they wanted to stay at Sheep Creek Lodge for a weekend, and I zoomed in near Sheep Creek to see what lakes were around that we could go fishing at. So the next thing, if we scroll down, we can click on other species. So it shows us which species are stocked by the hatcheries. And I will note that a lot of those may have been stocked long ago, but not all of those listed at stocked species are still stocked. They may have been stocked in like the 80s or the 90s, but currently we'll talk about it soon which species are stocked. But I talked about maybe your goal is to catch a burbot, and that's all you want to do. So if I click burbot, refresh lakes, now when I look at the map, I don't see any map pins. That's not because the map's broken. That's because I'm going to have to travel a little bit further if I want to catch burbot. So zooming out, I can see, okay, here are a couple of lakes that have been sampled and burbot have been found in them. So I'm going to have to travel a couple of hours if I want to go burbot fishing on a lake. I will say that this pin system doesn't include every single lake, because in order for it to be included on here, staff had to actually go to the lake and sample it. So if staff haven't made it to a specific lake and sampled, or if they haven't sampled recently, say that, you know, burbot were once really popular in a lake and then they, you know, got overfished or something, and now they're on their way back. Maybe Fish and Game hasn't made it back to that lake to survey. Also to be noted, this is about lakes. So this doesn't include river systems. So if you're an active burbot angler and you're going, I know there are burbot in the whole Susitna River system, you are right, but this is a lakes database. So you can use this to help dictate your trip to catch whatever species you want. So if I wanted to catch a burbot, I would be fishing somewhere near, you know, Glen Allen area, because there are a lot of options for burbot fishing there. And you can use this for Arctic grayling. You can use this for whatever species you can find on here. So there are quite a few. So that's one way of kind of finding a good spot to go. I'm going to unfilter for Burbot now, and I'll show you another thing that you can find with it. So not in all areas, but in some areas, I know that area management staff have done a good job in trying to let people know what to expect when they go out fishing at a lake. So, for example, Aurora Lake on the Kenai Peninsula. So if I click on that, directions are right here again. And oh, look, there are a few photos that have been uploaded. So I know what the lake looks like. So then there are documents. I have a lake site evaluation, a brochure, and a lake assessment report. So in these documents, if you click the Aurora brochure 2020 or the lake site evaluation, you are going to find information on parking. Is the parking lot paved or is it gravel? How many cars can fit in the parking lot? Is there a boat launch? Is it gravel or is it paved? Is there a bathroom? Do you have to walk a long ways before you find the lake? So some, not all, also contain this information. The next thing I'll show you, if we're leaving out that right now, is say you know the name of the lake you want to fish. You just want to know about it. You're like, okay, I'm fishing Mirror Lake this year. So you know Mirror Lake is in the Anchorage Bowl. I know I want to fish Mirror Lake. I don't know anything about it, but I've been driving by that lake for 10 years and I want to go fishing there. Okay, so you could use this tool instead. Click Lake Fishing Info, click the area, and then on the lake name that you're looking for. So here we are, we've got Mirror Lake in the Anchorage Bowl. It lists similar things, you know, which species are stocked there, how to get there, what you can expect, etc. And then you can also click recent stocking records there and find out how often it's stocked and with what. So those are kind of the two biggest resources I can show you on finding where to go, what your best options are going to be when you go ice fishing. So we'll hop back over to the PowerPoint. Okay, so now hopefully you have an idea of figuring out where to go based on what your goals are. Now, before we dive into the fish themselves, I mentioned stocked lakes quite a bit. I always want folks to know about our 2 state of Alaska run sport fish hatcheries. So the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Division of Sport Fish has 2 hatcheries, one in Anchorage, the William Jack Hernandez Sport Fish Hatchery, and one in Fairbanks, the Ruth Burnett Sport Fish Hatchery. Both hatcheries supply millions of fish to be fished for throughout the year. So here we go. We have the pink on this map is the distribution of the William Jack Hernandez Sport Fish Hatchery. And then the yellow is the Ruth Burnett Sport Fish Hatchery. So the goals of these stocking programs are to create and diversify sport fishing opportunity in areas that folks can access. So you can see the stocking efforts are concentrated around the road system. So we want you to be driving down the road and see a lake and know that there are fish there that you can go catch. So both of these facilities have public visitor centers. They are currently closed due to COVID-19, but we hope that someday in the future they will both be open again to the public and you can get a deeper dive into the state's stocking programs. So now we'll talk about which species are stocked. All of these species can also be found naturally in Alaska. So none of these are stocked only species. There are wild of all of these fish in Alaska as well. So I'll just go through them one by one. Arctic grayling is the first stocked species, but it's also a wild fish in Alaska. You can see these are really cool fish. They have this beautiful dorsal fin. So if you're wondering, you know, I'm new to fishing, I don't know what I want to catch, you might look at the grayling and you go, that's cool, that's what I want to go fishing for, and then you can filter for that in that lakes database. So grayling are a fun summer fish, and they're also a real treat if you can catch them through the ice. Next we have Chinook or king salmon. These are just like those king salmon that you would catch in the summer that are returning from the ocean. However, the hatchery holds these king salmon in the facility for 18 months, and then they're stocked into landlocked lakes. And that's their life cycle. So they never go out to the ocean. So I always like to tell people, when you see that we stocked king salmon into a lake, that does not mean you're likely to catch a 30-pound king salmon from Cheney Lake. It's likely going to be around 14 to 18 inches. And that's because these fish are feeding in the lakes. They're not going out to the ocean to these feeding grounds with a prolific food source. They're staying in our local lakes. So they're not going to be those big, large king salmon that everybody looks for. So how do you know you have a king salmon on the line? You can see in this photo the dark black mouth. It looks like it swallowed a bottle of ink. And then also, you can't see in this photo, but king salmon have spots along their whole tail and along their entire back. Versus coho salmon, which are also stocked in local lakes. Coho salmon do not have a black mouth. They do have spots along their back, but only at the tip of their tail. So that's how you can tell the difference between a king and a coho. So just look at the mouth as the easiest, quickest way to tell. Lakes are also stocked with rainbow trout. The name comes from the coloring. You can see that pretty pink rainbow on these fish. They're a really fun and common sport species. They've got a white mouth, so you don't have to worry about mixing them up with a king. And Arctic char. Arctic char are different looking. As you can see, the rainbow trout and the two salmon species I just showed you had dark colored spots on a light colored body. So let's just look back at those. So you can see the black spots on the white, black spots on the white. Char, or members of the char family, have dark colored bodies. So this pinkish brown, and then light colored spots. So that's how you know you have a member of the char family versus the trout. Arctic char, I like it a little bit deeper down in the water column than rainbow trout and grayling do. We'll talk about that in a bit. And then we'll talk about quickly which species are not stocked. So the Department of Fish and Game does not stock Alaska blackfish. So we just picked up stocking programs for lake trout. I have them listed as not stocked because I don't want people to think that if they go to a lake that we stocked lake trout, if you look, those lake trout were about 5 inches. So we're probably 3 to 4 years out from a lake trout that people want to catch, a bigger fish. So although they have been stocked, they're small. They need to grow. Burbot are not stocked by the department. Northern pike are not stocked by the department. And then in the regulations book or on Alaska Lakes database, any other fish species not listed as stocked is not stocked by the department. So Alaska blackfish, we'll talk a little bit about this. This fish is native to northern Alaska and a lot of the coastal regions. Somebody or something transported them to the Anchorage Bowl, and they are now present in some of our local lakes. So they are considered an invasive species in Anchorage. But the biggest point I want to get across with these is folks call us every year going, oh my gosh, I just caught a burbot in Mirror Lake. They're so excited. And we say, really, how big was it? And they're like, well, about 6 to 8 inches. Blackfish look a little bit like burbot. They stay on the bottom, but they don't get very big. They're, an 8-inch blackfish is a big blackfish. So if you think you may have caught a burbot in one of our local Anchorage Bowl waters, you probably caught a blackfish. I will note blackfish, they're invasive species in Anchorage. So I'm only speaking about Anchorage specifically. They make good pike bait, but be mindful that if you are going to use this fish for bait, you need to, and period, if you're going to retain the fish, you need to dispatch it before transportation, you cannot transport live fish in the state of Alaska. That is illegal. So make sure if you are going to keep blackfish for some bait, that you dispatch those fish at the lake. All right, lake trout. So like I said, we stocked some lake trout into a few lakes, but they are not the size of any of these lake trout, obviously, yet. Lake trout are a really popular fish for ice fishing in the winter. So they're super fun fish to fish for. There are some different color variations. So you can see the bottom right. This is a lake trout caught out of Kenai Lake versus this is a lake trout caught out of Lake Louise. So different colors based on the lakes that they're in. But you can see lake trout are members of the Char family. So they have that dark body color and those light colored spots. Lake trout can live incredibly long. Some lake trout have been found to be over 50 years old in the state of Alaska. So this is a species that if you really need to make sure you're looking at the regulations, there are some areas where these are pretty well protected and you can only keep one or you can't keep any. But thinking about fishing for lake trout, if I'm out there fishing, I might consider releasing a really big lake trout that I caught versus keeping it to eat, because these are long-lived fish. So I don't know. Another thing is, if you do keep a really big lake trout, it might be cool to send the head to the Department of Fish and Game if you decide to eat the fish, so that they can look at the otoliths or the ear bones, and that's how you can tell how old a fish is. So they could age that fish if you did decide to retain it. Okay, burbot. Burbot are not the prettiest fish. Here's a couple photos, but they're commonly called poor man's lobster, and that's because they're delicious. So burbot live on the bottom of lakes. They eat anything that comes through. Fish and game biologists have found sticks in their stomachs. They kind of remind me of a catfish when I think about what they've been eating. Burbot are delicious and they're really fun ice fishing fish. So if you're getting into ice fishing and you're starting to think about bigger species rather than your local stocked lakes, you want to try something new, burbot is definitely a great step to take. And then northern pike, very popular ice fishing species. So northern pike are invasive in South Central Alaska, so there are some different regulations for them. You should check those out because in South Central you can use additional fishing lines for northern pike, but in the interior they're native, and so don't expect to be able to do the same things pike fishing in interior Alaska as you can in South Central. But they're a fun ice fishing fish, very good time to go fishing for. All right, so we've talked through fish, we've talked through how to find a lake. So here are some things to consider when you're going fishing. The depth profile of the lake. How deep does it get? Where does it get deep? Or where are there spots where there are steep drop-offs? We'll talk about those things a little bit later. Private property again. So if I were to go ice fishing on Benka Lake, for example, I would know that I literally cannot step off that lake unless I'm at the public access site. It is all private property. So underwater structure, weed beds, drop-offs, like I mentioned, the drop-offs. Well, this bathymetric map is really helpful because I can see the drop-offs. So here on this point right here, it looks like there's a steeper drop-off right here. But how, I mean, I mentioned weed beds. How do we ever know if there's a weed bed here? A really good tip to see vegetation, and this doesn't always work, but it sometimes works, is looking on Google Maps, because sometimes the map images of the lakes were taken in the summer and you can see where the vegetation was around the lake in the summer. So that's one helpful tip, or just Google search the lake name online and folks will post pictures in Google and you can take a look, and if there's a shot where you notice where it was from, that might be helpful. Points and islands. So I always like to ice fish points and islands. They're popular ice fishing spots. That structure, usually fish like to form around those points and those islands. That's just a good spot to go when you're ice fishing. Time of year, where will the fish be? So I mentioned burbot. Burbot spawn in March, so they head to shallower water. So if you're out ice fishing in March, you might be looking for spots around these islands that the water is only 10 feet deep. So just thinking about that type of thing. And then how big is the lake? If you don't look at how big the lake is and say you're like, I want to fish on this point over here, and you didn't look, you might have a 1.5 mile walk to lug your sled to that spot. So make sure you're looking at actually how big the lake is before you make your final plan. So where to fish for target species, I alluded to this a little bit, but we've got our bottom fish, which are burbot like laying on the bottom. So do Alaska blackfish. So if you are catching blackfish and you're hoping to catch a rainbow trout, it means your bait is sitting on the bottom. You're likely not going to catch a rainbow trout because the blackfish are going to keep eating your bait. So you need to bring in a little bit of line so that you can get higher up in the water column. So we've got our burbot, we've got salmon and Arctic char, like it not on bottom, but above the bottom, kind of in the middle of the water column. For example, fishing game biologists and out of the Palmer office said in 17 Mile Lake, which is located just near Sutton, the Arctic char, the sweet spot is 22 feet. Right at 22 feet, you should be catching char. So the rainbow trout in that lake would be more like 10 to 15 feet. So if you can use this as a tool, if you want to catch a certain species, say you keep catching char, but you want to catch grayling, bring in a little bit of line, bring that bait up higher in the water column. And then pike like shallower, weedier areas. So they're going to be found on this, mostly on the surface. So what do fish eat? I have a lot of slides about what fish eat that I'm going to just breeze through. The main goal is for you to see that a fish diet is very diverse, and that's why a lot of different pieces of tackle can work for ice fishing. So fish eat plankton, which are tiny plants or animals, and a big thing that fish eat is macroinvertebrates, which we'll talk about here in a minute. They love larvae of insects. So we've got a damselfly, dragonfly larva. If you haven't seen dragonfly larva at a lot of our local lakes, there are usually a lot in there in the spring. So look around for these things. They're pretty cool to see. Caddis fly. So we've got our larva there. Mayfly larva. Stonefly, midges. So here we go. We've got an actual midge, and then here's a fly that folks use that looks a lot like a midge. So if you're not thinking about terminal tackle, if you're more like, that doesn't look like any of the tackle I use, a lot of flies look like these guys. And you can use flies through the ice if you'd like. Just make sure that they're not meant to float on the surface. You can use some that are more meant to be in the water. Leeches, fish love leeches. Freshwater shrimp or scuds are a pretty popular food source. Diving beetles, other fish are very popular food sources for fish. So you can see it from the stomach of this northern pike. It was chowing down a lot of other fish. This is a 3-spined stickleback. These are found in a lot of lakes in Alaska, and they are a primary food source for a lot of the larger predatory fish that you're going to be ice fishing for. So if you see some of these guys in a lake, that's a good sign. That means there's some good adequate food for those fish to be eating. So you've seen some of the things that fish eat. So now talking a little bit about what to use. So here are just some jig heads for ice fishing. This is something that you could put a little chunk of shrimp on, or a fish egg. You could put, there are these little tails that kind of, this is a tube jig. So Here we've got the tube that you put onto here. There are smaller ones for smaller species that, oh, here we go, right here. Sorry, I'm on my view, my face is blocking this right here. So here's one that has a tail put on it so you can see the heads here, and then someone just slid this on. So you can do that. You can use these lures. One of the Fish and Game staff members swears by using this for a lot of different species throughout the year. You could put on one of these little shiners. They're just, again, you can just thread them onto one of these jig heads. Here are a few other options. There are a lot of ice fishing options for catching fish. So I encourage you to try different ones, and obviously match your tackle size with the species that you're going to be fishing for. And I'll show you a slide on that in a moment. Here we go. So for stocked fish, what do you want to be using? Line 4 to 10 pound test, depending on your rod and reel. So if you're looking at those small spoons, that's going to be a 1/4 to a 1/2 ounce spoon, and hook size number 8 through 12. Then for your bigger species like lake trout, northern pike, and burbot, line 8 to 20 pound test would be good depending on your rod and reel. Spoon size 1/4 to a 1/2 ounce would still work. You could go larger for sure. Hook size 1/0 is a good option if you want to, a number 8 hook is going to be too small for burbot, northern pike, and lake trout. And then for pike have very sharp teeth. So a steel or titanium leader, like that shown in this photo, is a really good thing to have on hand, because those the teeth on the pike will just cut your line right in half. If you're out fishing an area, so I'll give you an example, the Nancy Lakes Recreation Area does have a stocked lake there that has rainbow trout in it. If you're trying to catch rainbow trout and you keep getting bites and then you pull your line back and there's nothing on it, the line's just cut, it means that there's probably some pike that have worked their way into that system and keep biting and cutting that line. So at that point, it's like, just put a wire leader on and pike fish, or move to a different area of the lake where, okay, the pike seem to like this area because it might be weedy and shallow. So let's move to different water where we might find a rainbow trout. So just some troubleshooting while you're out fishing. These are good to have. Common bait for ice fishing, shrimp is hugely popular. You can just go get some from the grocery store. If you keep salmon eggs in the summer and cure those, that's a great bait. Here are just some bait fish, herring. If you have hooligan works well. This would also be if you catch some Alaska blackfish, you could make, as long as they're dead, you can use those as bait. Power bait, get some scent in there, patskis, salmon eggs. And then, so if I'm speaking to someone who's like, I can't afford all of this, I just want to try it, I don't want to buy an auger, I don't even know if I want to buy a rod and reel, and I'm not feeding fish shrimp because I like eating shrimp, and you just want to go the cheap way, I've caught a lot of fish on a piece of corn. If you're not going to be retaining the fish, I wouldn't use corn. Corn is not obviously in the natural diet of fish, so it's not a highly recommended thing to use. But if you can't afford better bait, corn is cheap. Or if you're eating corn for dinner and just have a couple kernels left over, you could bring it down to the lake with you and stick it on a hook with a jig head, and you'll probably catch a fish or two on it. But yeah, it's not the number one option, but it's a very cheap option if that's a factor for you. Just before you go out ice fishing, you're going to want to know a couple fishing knots. Here are my 2 go-to knots for ice fishing, the Palomar knot and the improved clinch knot. These are super popular fishing knots. If you learn these 2 knots, you'll be in really good shape for not only ice fishing, but fishing the open water as well. And these are really helpful. You can just pause on the slide and practice with a rope and an eye bolt in your house if you don't want to practice on fishing line. So when you're on ice fishing, unlike the summer when you can use one rod at a time, for ice fishing, you can often use two fishing setups at a time. So if a family of 4 goes out fishing, they can actually have 8 fishing lines in the water. So if you have this option, if you have a few of you together, you can try different patterns through the ice. So some common ice fishing patterns, here's a T pattern. So you're going to drill a hole at 20, or basically between 15 and 20, between 10 and 15, right at 10, and between 5 and 10, and then across. So why did we go across at the 10? Because maybe we think that's where fish are most likely to be. And then if we find, okay, we're getting all of our bites here at the 15, we can just bump our T a little bit further, drill some holes here, bump this 5-foot hole back above, and then we're better targeting the fish. So by spreading out at across the landscape and at different depths, you have a higher likelihood of finding the fish than just drilling a bunch of holes next to each other in the same spot. C pattern is also really common. So this is used on points a lot. I mentioned points were good fishing spots. So this is again forming a C from 5-foot depth to 20-foot depth and then back right around that tip of the point. This pattern, usually you can get a fish to hit one of these, and then that can help dictate where you want to add more holes possibly later in your fishing day. Here are some common regulations questions. I won't talk through all of them, but one of the biggest questions we get for ice fishing is, do I need a king salmon stamp to go fishing our stocked lakes? And the answer is no. If you're fishing in stocked lakes for landlocked salmon, you do not need a king salmon stamp. And then what are the limits by species? This is just an example for anchorage. So if you are not fishing an anchorage stocked lake, do not pay attention to this. Regulations vary by water body. So I'm going to show you how to find where to look for your regulations. So if you go to the Fish and Game website here, go to fishing sport again. And if you scroll down here, we've got our regulations. And then you can choose your region, northern, south central, whichever you want. Click on South Central, for example, and then I can click the area that I'm going to go fishing in. I live in Anchorage, so I'm going to click the Anchorage Bowl. So you can see in stocked lakes for king salmon, I can keep 5 per day, 5 in possession in combination with other salmon. So that would mean that if I were in a lake with king and coho stocked salmon, I can keep 5 salmon. So not 5 of each of those. And then rainbow trout and stocked waters, 5 per day, 5 in possession. Arctic char, 5 per day, 5 in possession. So Arctic grayling, 5 per day, 5 in possession in stocked lakes in Anchorage. So if you had the best fishing day of your life and had a big family to feed, you could technically keep 5 salmon, 5 rainbow trout, 5 char, and 5 grayling in one day of fishing from an Anchorage stocked lake. So you could technically go home with 20 fish. If anybody ever accomplishes that, definitely let me know, because that would be a hard thing to do, including, I think it wouldn't be too hard with the rainbow trout and the salmon, but definitely to get the grayling in there would be. But again, take only what you need. Don't go crazy just trying to catch as many as you can if you don't need those. But here's how to find your fishing regulations for your area for ice fishing. Also, regional regulations. I won't open this PDF, but you might not see anything about ice fishing at all in your area. So that information is usually in the front of the regulations book. So that would be in regional regulations. So if you're looking at what you can use for ice fishing gear, like I said, you can use 2 lines for a lot of areas. That would be in this top area for across all areas, not just South Central. All right. There we go. Things to consider in the winter, just things to be thinking about. Obviously, the fish need oxygen to survive. So with snow and ice covering the lake, the plants living in the lake can't photosynthesize because there's no sunlight coming through. So this can lead to areas where there's no oxygen in the water. So the fish are obviously not going to want to be in this area. They are going to want to be where there is oxygen. So if this happens and we have a really long winter, a lot of shallower lakes, it might happen that there's no more oxygen in the lake because of the snow and ice cover. And this causes winter kill. Winter kill happens throughout the world, basically. Like I said, a lot of shallower lakes have this problem that once the snow and ice start building, that zone of oxygenated water just shrinks and shrinks and shrinks until it's not there anymore. So if you in the spring notice a local lake that has a bunch of dead fish on the shore, give us a call. We want to know about it. But likely what happened was there wasn't an adequate oxygen supply due to a long, cold, hard winter. And finally, just some additional resources for you before you get out ice fishing. The Alaska Department of Fish and Game website has this We Fish AK area, which also contains the fishing regulations, stocked lakes database, online fishing information, etc. And I showed you a lot of this stuff. Also, you can use online forums like the Alaska Outdoor Forum. IceShanty.com was pretty popular a few years ago. To just get information. There are also Facebook groups, different Facebook fishing groups that you can talk to other anglers and see how they're doing. And you know, maybe now is a good time to find one in your area and say, hey, has anybody been out ice fishing? What's the depth thickness on DeLong Lake? Has anybody tested it out before you head out to the lake? And then additional resources, your local fishing stores are great resources for where to go and what to use. And then your best resources is your fellow anglers. Most folks are willing to help and give you advice if you need it. So don't hesitate to reach out to other anglers. And don't hesitate to reach out to the Department of Fish and Game. We want to see you out there fishing. And if you do catch some nice fish, if you use the hashtag WeFishAK on social media, that will allow Department of Fish and Game staff to see your photos, which we always like to see. So at this time, I'd like to thank you all for joining me tonight. I hope that you learned something. I hope that you are thinking about ice fishing. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them as a comment on the YouTube right here, or I'm going to list my email in the information about the presentation and you can reach me there. Thanks so much and have a great night.